Good evening. My name is Thomas Steininger. I welcome you to Radio Evolve, our international webcast for consciousness and culture. Our today's guests in Radio Evolve are Otto Scharmer and Arawana Hayashi. They make a powerful and unusual team. Each of them works with sensing and pre-sensing the field that holds us. Otto's pioneering research with Theory U and the Presencing Institute has opened new horizons of human creativity. Arawana is a dance artist and meditation teacher. Together they have developed a new art form, which they called social presencing theater, a method to develop a collective perception for the social field and to build the capacity to learn how to ongoingly develop such fields. I interviewed Otto Scharmer and Arawana Hayashi together for the last issue of our German magazine Evolve. So today we play for you this interview with Otto Scharmer and Arawana Hayashi. Just as a very simple first question, the social presencing theater that both of you are kind of cooperating on. I saw one presentation that you gave in Oslo, I think, a year ago, Arawana, about it. But for our readers, what should we... how should we envision what you're doing? What is social presencing theater? What is it for? And how should we envision what this work is about?
Aha. So I'll jump in and then Otto, please add in. A lot of the definition or the view of it probably comes from the name itself, that this topic that you brought up of social mindfulness is such an interesting one because it is something that we're quite interested in and see evidence of in our work. And in this case, we're calling it social presencing, which is both a kind of mindfulness in terms of just one's ability to notice, to be present, to pay attention in a gentle way to experience, but it also probably includes a larger sense of awareness or the creativity that comes out of the space by the group. So there's a view of creativity or innovation, certainly from my background, that is something that arises from a sense of stillness, sense of spaciousness, rather than that it's a repeat or a better version of something that happened in the past. So the presencing also has a sense of what is emerging fresh, what is emerging that's not conditioned by lots of past experience, but what collectively can we access that is really based on wisdom and based on compassion and based on these principles that are cultivated by a mindfulness practice. And theater means that it just is made visible, that because we're working with the actual physical body, the body's visible. The relationships between bodies are visible. The way the choices people make in terms of their activity is quite visible. So that word theater means a place where something is of significance is made visible. And so I think the view of the work is that we can make on an individual, on a group, on a systems level, we can set up an arena and an attitude in which we can actually see and experience the feeling quality of the shift that the groups of people, that systems can make, hopefully from being more stuck, more locked in convention, more locked into conceptual frameworks into something that is fresher and more open and more possible.
It seems that both of you, and Otto, I just listened to a TED talk that you gave in Hamburg, I think a year ago, I'm not sure, that both of you are talking about the social field. And I particularly have in mind, Otto, you gave this example when you were still living in Hamburg and growing up there and having it blocked off the anti-atomic demonstrations. And you were describing this police attack and how this was the first time, or at least an important time where you felt the sense of a social field. You talked about a knife cutting into body. Although you were not injured, it was a social field that you were describing. And the way I understand you, Arawana, it seems also that the body is not just something visible, it's also something tangible. There's a body sense, and it seems that both of you in your different ways are working with something that is more than just my mind, more than just my body. There's a social field that you're working with, and I would like to hear from both of you, and also particular Otto right now, when we're talking about the social field, what are we talking about here?
Well, maybe one jump off point there, Arawana, is kind of your notion of the three bodies. So maybe that's something you could add, and I then can build on that, because I think that gives a very good foundation for deeper inquiring into that question.
So briefly, the work with the three bodies is an acknowledgement of our body-mind system, that it isn't just a mind, but it's actually a feeling, sensing organ, a body of each individual, and then that's placed on this large earth body, which we never lose touch with, and our losing touch has caused such disastrous results. And then the social body, which is again the body-mind of the social, of the society, that groups and society itself is a living being, and it has body embodiment, and it has a awareness mind, and it has a conventional mind. So those three bodies are the base of it. And then Otto, please continue with that.
Yeah. So that's of these three bodies, kind of, it's the social bodies, kind of, that is kind of the you could say in a tangible way that's maybe the least visible sometimes. And so that was always my area of primary interest. And one of the individuals kind of that opened my eyes for that was actually Joseph Beuys, kind of the late 20th century avant-garde artist from Germany. And so his concept of the social sculpture is actually using the key principles of sculpture and moving them from space to time, right? Kind of reflecting on Lehmbruck and kind of his physical sculpture work and the principles he discovered there. And then Beuys basically took that and applied it to time and called that the social sculpture, right? The social sculpture always kind of evolving in a time space. And so when you look at the current moment we are living in, which is kind of a time of profound disruption, that means kind of that of the different qualities of time, one becomes like really front and center stage, which is the emerging future, right? Because if you're kind of in a more continuous, normal environment, often what happens, kind of the future is a function of the past. It's a modification of the past. But when we deal with disruption, by definition, kind of the future is going to be different from the past. So we as human beings are challenged with situations where we kind of need to develop the capacity to lean into what hasn't quite landed yet, to lean into new possibilities that maybe are in the process of arriving, kind of, and kind of, it is kind of that kind of capacity, which is a profoundly creative capacity, but creative not only on the level of individual expression of creativity, but on a social and collective level. That was always my primary area of interest. And so, social presencing theater, which really Awarana has pioneered kind of in the Presencing Institute. I have had a small role in co-creating that. And so for me, so when I, just from more like from an outside perspective, what really is that social processing theater? I would say it is a blend between three things: mindfulness, kind of making a system see itself, right? Kind of switching, shifting the awareness back onto its source, and then there is a social science part of it. So it's basically really with a method investigating deeper structures that give rise to social systems, that give rise to social behavior, including stakeholder mappings and so forth. And then the third element, you could, for many people, probably you will view that are familiar with constellation work. So that's kind of, it has a number of similarities with that, but also a number of differences. So I would say it's basically a blend of these three things, but our specific interest really is in this capacity to sense and lean. So it's not only kind of looking back, and addressing, all these issues, of the past, kind of that still are showing up in the current situation, but also specifically this capacity to lean into what isn't quite there yet. And so in regard to that, and also in regard to practical work with organizations, big companies, governments, kind of multi-stakeholder groups, we have found social processing theater profoundly effective in helping systems to go from an ego to go through a shift of consciousness from ego to eco. And the reason why social processing theater is so effective is that in a relatively short amount of time, it creates a visceral experience where a system is not only seeing itself, you're seeing the deeper patterns of the current situation and how they may transform, but also sensing itself. Because as we know, the number one problem in the world today is the knowing-doing gap, right? We know everything about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and, all the things that need to happen in our, 21st century environmental and social condition. Yet, we are not able to translate kind of this knowing that we have into a changed collective behavior. And what we believe is the reason for this knowing-doing gap is that, there is, so we have the hand, we have the head, what's missing is the heart, right? It's the making the system not only seeing themselves, but sensing themselves. So that's kind of the key, we believe, to unlock collective creativity, so that you access the level of compassion on a systems level. And that's where, you can talk about that until the cows go home, but can you really deliver that? And that's why where social processing theater practices have become so important in our practical work, because they allow us to really ground this aspiration in a practical collective experience that gives people a concrete handle, what to do next and how to, use some of these insights for their real world change initiatives.
Arawana, do you want to expand on that?
I don't think so, other than to just emphasize that people, there's a lot of longing on the planet to have a good world for everybody, to whatever that means to them, to go forward. And creativity is a natural quality of every single person. And a longing for good situation, a good life, a good world is hidden in every person. And so the feeling quality that Otto is referring to is something that, is in the body-mind system, but oftentimes it's not accessed. That kind of will, let's say, just on a collective will that is connected to how much we care, really. We care about one another. We care about the planet we live in. We care about the society that we're in. So I think there's something about the social presencing theater that just having people together, the physicality of it, the fact that it's not the same old. It's slightly kind of fresh in terms of what actually is happening here. That those qualities help with this embodied feeling of knowing, of insight, but then it can be applied when we get back into whatever our context is.
A question I would have about this, because Otto was emphasizing how the social body is the most difficult to be aware of, and how the work that you're doing is a work to become aware of the social body. But it seems to me also that the work is not just a work to become aware of the social body, but also the social body is a part of the awareness process itself. It's a sensing instrument that somehow you're not just aware of a social body as an object, but doing something together as you're doing in the social presencing theater is something like a collective sensing process. Is that something one could say?
Otto?
Arawana? Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you said it, you put it very beautifully, and I think both Arawana and I would underline every single word of that. And that is really, I don't want to call it the magic, because that makes it kind of sound a little obscure, because I think it's really something you can explore with a method. But that really is let's call it the core process of what happens when you debrief and unpack the deeper layers of collective sensing experience, for example, of a social presencing theater experiences. So what it is that, what we do there, and the whole notion of the social field really is, so what is a social field? A social field is, it's the quality of relationship, between individuals, groups, and organizations that give rise to patterns of conversation and thought and action, which in turn create practical results. So if you take that as a definition of social fields, it's all about the quality of relationships. So coming from a farm, growing up on an organic farm, so what do you see? Kind of your parents talk half their life about the quality of the soil. And because that's kind of the ultimate capital, kind of that's the ultimate leverage point for everything that grows and, is growing in the field. But that condition for something to grow itself is invisible. Kind of that's the soil. So in the social field, it's exactly the same thing. So the social field is the invisible condition that allows these patterns of conversation and thought and action that I was just talking about to arise. But the condition, so the social field soil, right, is described by the quality of relationships that we have. And that is exactly what usually that is in our blind spot of attention. It's also in the blind spot of traditional systems theory. So what we do with social presencing theater is we put we move this blind spot into the center of our awareness and into our investigation by, making it visible and putting it out to exploration from all the different angles. And what Arawana and I have been, and our colleagues at the Presencing Institute have been working on over the past year or two is to now, after we have developed social presencing theater as an intervention methodology in, capacity building and practical change work in a variety of systems, that we now really further develop it as a research tool. Because at the end of the day, the key to scale in this century is research. And so what we are currently doing is really to develop social presencing theater as a research methodology, including, identifying archetypes, how social fields are stuck in the current condition of capitalism and democracy that we are in, and what are patterns that we see in a variety of systems, how they can be unfrozen, so to speak, and develop. So that's a little bit how you could say how a social farmer, that's a farm boy perspective on the social field. But I would also suggest that Arawana adds to that, because she really comes more from not only a mindfulness, but also a social arts perspective at this phenomenon, which is absolutely central to everything that we do at the Presencing Institute. Because at the end of the day, the Presencing Institute is bringing together science, social art practices, mindfulness, and institutional transformation. So that's what we try to bring together. And that's where the social art labs and the social art practices are really a key component for what we are trying to do.
Please, Arawana.
So I'm just one of several people who are investigating this topic of social art. And again, in light of the fact that there is such a thing as social creativity, as social innovation. And my background is in the arts. I mean, I worked as a dancer and as a choreographer, and oftentimes with people that were not trained in the theater and working in the theater. So the idea of making theater with people, kids on the street, or with communities, has been part of my interest for my whole career, really. And so the sense that we could say that art is one of these, it holds the value of a culture, art does, and it also shapes the values of a culture, that it is connected to how people see what it is to be human being with other human beings on the planet. And that's communicated through its art forms. So what we're investigating here is maybe this sense of what actually is direct perception of our experience, out of which creativity arises. So what is that process that collectively we notice, this is this very moment's experience, and there's freedom to move from there into a fresh direction. Mm-hmm. How does that work with groups of people? And traditionally this has been done in the performing arts through improvisation, as jazz musicians do, or as improvisers. Their job is to collectively listen into what's happening and then open up from that process. So that's part of my own training, has been this combination of art making, in my case in the performing arts, and meditation practice. And not meditation in terms of a particular religious expression, but meditation in terms of what actually comes out of nothing, as it were. Mm-hmm. And that very much influences us. And also, to circle back on what Otto said, the work is not so much an exploration psychologically of how we arrived at this stuck situation, but it's more acknowledging, yes, there are collective oppressions and confusions and that live in all of us and live in the collective. And there's also this basic goodness, basic sanity, basic strength, basic intelligence that is also what it is to be in both an individual and in the collective. So I think in my own work, I'm interested in tapping into that recognition that we have, that we don't need to be continually obsessing about how we have a lot of flaws and faults, both culturally and personally. But there's an honest acknowledgement of that, and an honest heartfeltness to that, and that is part of the soil, that honest feeling quality of who we are fully as a human. That's a soil, again, out of which creativity arises. So in terms of social art, it's not just art that is based upon kind of social work kind of art, which I also have a lot of respect for, but it's more that collectively on this planet, we need to really experience what it is to collectively create. And I think the social presencing theater is a lens out of which we're trying to see what is the process? What is the process? Where do we have to pay attention? How do we have to pay attention? How do we have to hold one another in order for this emergence to happen? Or this, maybe transformation is too big a word, but something like that. A shift to happen. So yeah, in my case, it comes from this combination of a meditation and arts background and a kind of enormous appreciation for, it's kind of a giant sense of appreciation for just what is, and how, the enormous painfulness of being a human and the enormous joyfulness of being a human is what the theater has always been about. And it continues to be that, even in the kind of side track of the theater that we're working in right now.
One reason why I find it particularly intriguing that you are involved in this as an artist is because I would say you represent also a different form of intelligence. An intelligence that is more an intuitive intelligence than an intellectual intelligence. Because what we are talking about social independence, there can be deep insight about systems interdependence that can be very accurate, very important, but it's still an intellectual representation of something. But it seems what you're doing is holding this intellectual representation. There's nothing wrong about that, but it's also going deeper in that direct perception of the social sphere as a living body. Is that something that allows the living body, maybe it's too much to say, to be aware of itself through our individual consciousness? And this is something that is more than an intellectual can do. You need a direct intuitive relationship to this social sphere to be capable of doing this. So it seems there's something in the cooperation of the two of you where to have this artist, and I think, Otto, what you are talking about, voice, the social sculpture also relates to that, is a different intelligence that is also new in our kind of social understanding, how we can work with social interventions and how we can really create social transformation. So that is also, if one of you wants to respond to that, please feel both free.
No, it's definitely true. I think we, in a very conscious way, try to bring together kind of different intelligences. There is, you said intellectual and non-intellectual. There is other ways. I mean, you can also say it's maybe analytical, intuitive, right? And then in German you have Verstand, Vernunft. So there is like, I think from an evolutionary perspective, kind of the analytical mind is kind of just kind of one particular development of, of a stage of development of the human mind. And then there are other capacities of the mind and the heart that are being developed. And of course, in the Presencing Institute, we try to, bring, the concepts of the open mind, open heart, open will is not to say, well, one is the intellect, so that intelligence only resides in one of them, but so there is intelligence in all of them, and that's, in order to get access really, knowing of the field, kind of we really need to shift the inner place from that we operate. So that in many ways, kind of from a methodological point of view. So it's just kind of another way of confirming what you just said, right? So our angle into that is, and you could say in many ways, so what's kind of the foundation moment of theory use? So one of them might be, when I listened to this late CEO of Hanover Insurance, Bill O'Brien, who claimed that the success, summarizing his own experience as a leader, he said the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. Mm-hmm. So it depends on the inner place from that we operate. And so when you look at, and based on that, today, that inner place I would describe as open mind, open heart, and open will capacities. So those are like different places that we can operate from. And when you want to, so for example, we, in all our foundational activities, we work with the different levels of listening, the 4 different levels of listening. But essentially, and they evolve as you shift the inner place from that you operate. And as long as you, operate from this instrument here, you're just kind of looking at reality from outside. But if you really want to investigate the social body or the social field, you need to shift the place from where your attention is originating from being generated from here to happening from the field. So I think in level 3 and level 4 listening, what we call empathic or generative listening, the listening is happening from the field, is happening kind of from the social body, so to speak. And that is really, in all the social art practices, really the capacity that in all co-creative processes, I should say, the capacity that we are honing. And I think it is particularly in the light of this century, it will be really center stage of the big battles and developments that we have to come. So when you so in the PI work, the Processing Institute work, we often refer to the challenges that we face in terms of the ecological divide, the social divide, and the spiritual divide. And so the social divide and all these movements really go back to the 19th century, right? The rise of the industrial laissez-faire capitalism and the labor movement coming out of that and so forth. And the ecological divide, the green movement, is really kind of arose from the last third of the 20th century. But what we see today is really, I believe, the beginning of a third movement that has to do with the spiritual divide, and which has everything to do with AI. It has everything to do with really the big crisis we are in, which is the unintentional impact of technology, not on the outer nature, like in the environmental movement with, the Silent Spring and so forth, but the unintentional impact of technology on our mind, kind of on our inner nature. And that's where we are in a development where everything that can be automated is going to be automated and be done much more efficiently by machines. But then what's left, right? So and if there is a place for us in the future, I think it has everything to do with not only optimizing this kind of intelligence, but really developing our literacy in what we call vertical development, which includes kind of to move the place from where I operate from my own persona and from my own mind to sourcing what I'm feeling and what I am, also kind of what comes through my will from the field, kind of from a field from the social field, kind of from the social body that I am being part of. And it's that kind of literacy that we try to make a contribution to, and that probably in this century, just in a few years, will be as important as the ecological crisis. But because this unintentional impact of machines And automation on our mind is something we are just starting to become aware of.
Yeah. You touched on it quite a bit already, but also because we are coming to the end of our time, I really would like to focus also. A lot of what we're bringing up is also covered by what we call mindfulness. But it seems that you are adding a certain dimension to mindfulness with social presencing that is going a step further in this social field. What would you say is this particular contribution of social presencing also in relationship to what mindfulness is and can be? And why is this particularly important to address this spiritual divide that you're talking about?
So, there are many, so mindfulness actually it means different things to different people, as we know, from different traditions. And so the attending to one's own experience, and just in terms of the phenomenology of experience, attending to how we experience something, and the mind that experiences that is a kind of mindfulness, but also has a larger sense of relaxing the mind into sort of what's emerging. So it's not just about the moment experience, but the depth of the moment, which is maybe what I would call awareness. And so I think the work is about, it's really about human beings' practice. I think of mindfulness. It's like, what is it to really be a human being? And I'm not that interested in sort of suppressing discursive thoughts and whatnot, but we are interested in cultivating the sense of what the worthiness of every human. And the crisis on the planet with depression and burnout and anxiety disorder and suicide and whatnot, this is like a crisis around, who am I as a human being? What is it to be a being connected to other beings on the planet, that somehow that has gotten so, disconnected in that way. So social presencing theater and all of the presencing work affords this kind of container for building, as Otto calls this, soil of beginning to be human with one another. And it's not just, obviously it's not just the application of a theory, but it's a way of living our life, whether it's with our families, or our partners, or our neighbors, or food co-op, or whatever. It's just being able to sense oneself always as a social body, always in interdependency with others, always with care. Even when we're angry, it's a kind of care for each other. But being able to continually cultivate those qualities of just humanness and the goodness of being a human, I think is really our work. And how, of course, paying attention is the main ingredient to begin that, is that you have to notice and be self-reflective and collectively reflective in order to cultivate these kind of qualities. So I think the work encourages a collective reflection on what is our experience, what is it that we together are making.
To your last question, so there is mindfulness has been so far mostly applied to the cultivation of the individual, and what we have been focusing on is how the power of mindfulness can be applied to the transformation of the collective, the transformation and the evolution of the collective, and so that's where we try to develop practices that are useful in that regard, so that it can be something that is becoming more and more part of modern day management and leadership practice.
So this was our interview with Otto Scharmer and Arawana Hayashi. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did doing this interview with both of them. Thank you very much for listening to Radio Evolve. In 2 weeks, we will again play our next international and English language edition of Radio Evolve. Good evening from Frankfurt.